Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You're watching our weekly program, Talk to OBN. In this edition, we'll be discussing about Ethiopia Somaliland Sea Outlet Agreement made recently. And I joined by Zemedeneh Nigatu, economic expert and chairman of Fairfax Africa Fund, live from Addis Ababa, Finfinne. Mr. Zemedeneh, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me back on your program.
Wonderful. Okay, what's your take on this recent agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland on ports and sea utilization and outlets agreements?
Right. So my view is that this is a very, very significant positive step, not only for Ethiopia and Somaliland, but for the whole of Eastern Africa, not just Horn of Africa, but Eastern Africa all the way down to Kenya. The reason I say that is, and I've stated this some other place earlier, Ethiopia is the third largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. It's the second most populous country on the continent after Nigeria. And its economy will continue to expand for decades to come. And its population is projected to reach 180 million in the next 20 years. So when you take this into consideration and you see where Ethiopia is geographically located, I think it's inevitable that Ethiopia needs to have an outlet to the sea, a direct access to the sea for its own economic activity to grow, but more importantly, for the region's economic activity to grow. And I use other examples. I mean, if you look at countries where neighbors where countries have grown rapidly, for example, if you take China, the rise of China initially helped economic activity grow in Southeast Asia. And of course, ultimately, the global economy benefited from that. So in the United States, the same thing. The fact that the United States is the largest economy in the world has benefited its neighbors, Canada as well as Mexico. So I take that into context when we talk about the port deal. I look at it broadly. Okay, it's not just a transactional one port. Ethiopia gets a sea access, Somaliland gives that. No, I think we need to look at it in a broader context as to who benefits, the region as a whole. So from that perspective, it's a very significant first step, because Ethiopia, as you know, has been looking for a sea outlet of its own since 1993, since it became landlocked when Eritrea became independent. So it's an initiative that's been talked about for years and years and years, but it's finally come to fruition. It's come to reality. And importantly, through a mutual agreement with Somaliland, okay, with negotiation and understanding that it benefits everybody. So it's a very, very significant step for the whole region, for Ethiopia, for Somaliland, and even for Somalia, which is a very close neighbor, close bordering country of Ethiopia. Somalis and Ethiopians shared a lot of common things, and I think they would also eventually benefit from this as well. So very significant step.
Two countries, Somaliland and Ethiopia, have inked agreements and signed a memorandum of understanding on areas of cooperation, mainly on this military base, sea outlets, other development activities that is going to be carried out between these two countries. Can you just tell us the details in it?
Sure. So I have seen the press releases. I've seen the comments made by senior officials from both Ethiopia and Somaliland. So what I can refer to is what's been officially stated. And in that regard, the agreement, the MOU, states that Ethiopia will take a 50-year lease of a 20-kilometer or over 12-mile land access to the sea, and Ethiopia will use it 50 years under a lease agreement. In return, now again, it's not been worked out. All the details have not been worked out, but there have been reports in the media, and the Ethiopian government has also indicated, although it's not specified, that Somaliland will have equity in, I believe it's in Ethiopian Airlines, perhaps it could be in Ethio Telecom. Those kinds of details are to be worked out according to the press release and the government statements over the next 1 month. Okay, so there is Ethiopia, as I said, benefits from direct access. That means my understanding, and then I don't know what the details are, but probably be able to use its own currency. It will manage the ports itself, the access. It will do the investment. There is some reports yesterday, for example, a new railway extension of 90 kilometers will be built by Ethiopia all the way to the coast. So it's win-win for both. Somaliland will get, some financial benefits, and also apparently there are some diplomatic discussions about other things. But again, because they're not final and they're not public, I wouldn't be able to comment on it. But it is actually beneficial to both sides. And again, I've stated before and earlier as well, we need to look at it strategically in a broader sense, what this deal means. As I mentioned to you, there's a forecast from the world's largest investment bank, Goldman Sachs, which is based in New York, that over the next several decades, maybe 40, 45 years, Ethiopia will be amongst the 15 largest economies in the world, not in Africa, in the world, which means, as I said, it uplifts the entire neighborhood. But secondly, most importantly, Ethiopia needs multiple sea outlets. So I'm assuming this is one of many to come. The how-tos, I'm sure, will be discussed. But today, Ethiopia relies primarily, almost exclusively, on the port of Djibouti. And that's fine. I mean, to a certain extent, that's fine. But as I said, if you're looking at 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and the Ethiopian economy is going to be amongst the 50 largest in the world, you have to ask yourself, is one port adequate? And the answer is no. So there will be, and this is just me commenting, I would expect other port deals to be negotiated and finalized in the coming X number of periods, okay? Because this one, the Somaliland deal is very significant, very important, but Ethiopia will need to have similar kinds of negotiations and discussions and agreements with other countries in the neighborhood, whether it's Somalia or Djibouti or Eritrea. The ports of Asab, I think, is very important. So for example, for the northern part of Ethiopia, the Eritrean ports of Asab and Matsawa, I think, are much more convenient because of the distance, right? And for the central part and the southern part, again, the Somaliland port, the one that's been negotiated, is very important because of access proximity. In addition to the fact that Ethiopia would have a lease on the port. But when you think about it, the Lamu port, the Lapset project in Kenya, for example, which Kenya has invested very significantly, and it's building it as a partnership, or at least to benefit other countries, in particular countries like Ethiopia. Again, that will be an additional outlet. The how-tos can be discussed. I know there's a lot of comments on social media, for example, or even in the global media. I mean, every major news media outlet in the world has covered this agreement. And even yesterday, I watched the U.S. State Department's daily briefing, and the U.S. government also commented. So this port deal actually has geopolitical significance, okay? And my view has always been Ethiopia acquiring this through a lease gives relief, okay, to Ethiopia, gives relief not to the neighborhood, because a very large Ethiopia deprived of access creates instability for the whole region. It's a very large country with a very large population. So to deprive Ethiopia access to the sea would be, I think, unhealthy for the neighborhood. It will create permanent instability. So the neighborhood as a whole, the countries in the region as a whole, should look at this and say, how do we create a win-win for all of us? It's not a zero-sum game. I don't see it that way. Okay, so the answer to your question is, it's a positive development. It has big geopolitical significance, but in practical terms also, it benefits the whole neighborhood. And that's how we should look at it. I know I've seen statements yesterday from the government of Somalia and others, but I think that will come down and they all will negotiate, I think, amicably.
Okay, you've mentioned this 50 years lease agreement. And what does it mean by lease agreement as far as your economic expertise concerns?
When you lease something, you pay for it. In what form it could be negotiated, but that means you have the economic right to use what you leased, in this case, the port. And my expectation is that Ethiopia will have the full right to have its ships docked there, for its goods to come directly from the port to Ethiopia. Obviously, the transaction will be in the official Ethiopian currency, the birr, okay? As opposed to, for example, right now, Ethiopia is paying, I understand, $1.5 billion or something more to Djibouti in US dollars. Okay, that's a very significant dollar forex outflow for Ethiopia. So I'm expecting in the Somaliland deal, beyond the lease payment that Ethiopia has to pay, the daily transactions of goods transiting coming through that will be conducted under Ethiopian law and the Ethiopian in the Ethiopian currency. Again, using examples of other countries. By the way, I don't think people should be very, very concerned, as I see in some social media commentary. The United States, okay, leased the Panama Canal, which is not even bordering the United States, by the way. Panama is not even bordering the United States, unlike, say, Somaliland and Ethiopia. It leased the Panama Canal and operated it for 100 years. Okay? So there are historical precedents we can follow, and the U.S. managed it. The U.S. dollar was the currency transaction for everything that passed through. So we can use examples of other countries. Okay? So I would say this is what I expect based on examples we've seen in other countries. And, you know, it's funny, there are historical precedents. So I don't want people to think this is the first of its kind ever in the world and that we should be worried about it. No, we shouldn't worry about it. There are ways of managing these kinds of transactions and relationships. They're historical. I mean, just Google. There are examples of these things. So because yesterday what I saw on, especially on Twitter, was, yes, some people are balanced, but there are a lot of people who are very concerned and very extremist views about this thing. And I think we should say, well, let's just calm down. And you know what? I commented a couple of days ago on another media that Africa is now implementing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA. It's coming, it's live now, right? The basic premises, the main driving force of the AfCFTA is open borders, collaboration among Africans, leveraging the resources of the continent to the benefit of Africans. That's exactly what this is all about. Ethiopia is leveraging an asset that exists in Somaliland, which Ethiopia is willing to pay for, and Somaliland is going to benefit from it as well. So consider the openness we're talking about, our Africa coming together. I mean, we're here in Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union. The whole purpose of the African Union is to bring Africans together, to work together. We talk about non-Africans exploiting Africa. Come on. This is Africans wanting to work together. And that's how we should frame this whole process and not get carried away with emotions. I do understand people get emotional sometimes, but let's be practical. And that's my view, is we'll all benefit from this agreement.
I mean, so many economic scholars, including yourself, give commentaries on this sea outlet claims of Ethiopia since the get-go. Ethiopia, officially, showed the interest of accessing seaport before a couple of months. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia presented his, remark to the parliamentarians, and after that, we've reached here, doing agreement with the Somaliland. But that time, most people put this sea outlet claim of Ethiopia directly with Eritrea. Why Ethiopia chose Somaliland over Eritrea, though, or other ports, other sea outlets?
Listen, I'm thinking it's a question of timing. It's a question of sequencing, because my guess is, my expectation is, down the road, Ethiopia will probably be entering into negotiations with Eritrea to use, in particular, the port of Assab, okay, but also Mizwa. So I am just guessing this is a question of timing. What opportunity came up first? So yeah, Eritrea. Remember also, Ethiopia and Eritrea have been in discussions about a lot of things from what we understand, from what we read in the media. And one of them was the use of the ports, okay, in the northern part of, in the Eritrean ports, for the northern part of Ethiopia, by the way. So, I mean, I'll give you a very good example of how both Eritrea and Ethiopia can benefit from using those two ports. We have a very large manufacturing facility in the northern part of Ethiopia. Today, we export, it's an export business, 100% export business. Today, we export our goods, our manufactured goods via Djibouti. It's a 3 to 4 days trip. Okay, the same thing when we bring raw materials, machineries, and equipment. Again, it's another 3 to 4 days trip. It's, you know, kind of expensive. But if Ethiopia and Eritrea were to enter into an agreement, okay, again, what shape or form and all, it's discussable. Then our trip, the trip from our factory to the port of Asab could be as short as half a day, maybe 8 hours, okay? That means it reduces our cost. There are a lot of industrial parks in the northern part of Ethiopia who can also benefit from that. So I would expect eventually the two countries will reach an agreement for the use of those two ports, okay? When, I don't know. What shape, I don't know. But it is logical to think of it that way. But this Somaliland deal, I'm guessing, is the opportunity came faster, and the two parties presumably were able to reach an agreement much quicker than it would have done with, say, perhaps Eritrea. I know because the Eritrean thing has been discussed, talked about for years and years and years. And actually it accelerated over the last 5 years that we thought perhaps there may be something to be done by now. It didn't happen, but I'm guessing it will eventually happen. It's only logical, okay? We, at least from a commercial side of it, you know, commercial transport from seafarers, cargo ships and things like that. So let's just assume it will happen eventually.
I heard that your comments came out, I mean, so many times in the past, and you commented that Ethiopia pays a mammoth amount for port rent annually. And so having access to this Somaliland sea outlet, to what extent would this huge amount of money will be reduced for Ethiopia?
Right. So the short answer is very significant. But let me put that in context. I think we're specifically referring to Djibouti, right? At the moment, Ethiopia pays, from what I understand, $1 billion plus $1.5 billion a year for the use of the port of Djibouti. I stand to be corrected by the amount, but it does pay a very substantial amount. Ultimately, if you have to ask me as an investor, as a business analyst and all that, Ethiopia and Djibouti should also enter into a similar agreement. Djibouti in particular would benefit very significantly if they were to enter an arrangement similar to what was recently concluded with Somaliland. I mean, I think for Djibouti also, they already are leasing land to the United States, the Chinese, the NATO forces. Okay, so they're accustomed to leasing land to others, right? So in this case, they will be leasing or arranging a direct access for Ethiopia, a neighbor whose economic growth will benefit Djibouti very significantly. So my recommendation to both the Ethiopian government and the Djiboutian government would be try to enter something similar, be practical, okay? And I'm sure they can work out the arrangement, what rewards Djibouti gets, what Ethiopia gets, which part of the port, the direct access Ethiopia will have. But it's important for the whole region, as I said, it reduces tension because it's not sustainable for Ethiopia to be deprived of landlocked, to be a landlocked country deprived of access direct. It's not for the neighborhood. It would just be unhealthy. So let's all be practical and enter a negotiation. A lot of countries have done this in other parts of the world. And we're talking about neighbors who will grow together if this were to happen. And that's my recommendation. But anyways, the other part of the comment I want to add is though, so we're looking at, say, now Somaliland. Obviously, Ethiopia is using Djibouti, but probably, hopefully, in an expanded arrangement. But also, Ethiopia will probably end up using, remember what I said, if it's going to be amongst the 15 largest economies in the world, it needs multiple outlets. Okay? So it could be Lamu in Kenya. It could be Port Sudan. It could be other outlets that are in Somalia itself. Okay, so I would say, and then the arrangement should be very innovative, very forward-looking, thinking out of the box. Okay, and that I think will help Ethiopia and the community and the regions, the countries in the region, to grow together, and then we'll benefit from all of it. I would look at it very practically. That's my view.
Sharing resources among neighboring nations is a global experience, including seaports. Why are such initiatives discouraged or even denounced when it comes to Africa and other developing countries?
That's a very, very good question. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where Africans, this theme I heard the last couple of years called African Solutions for African Problems. I think this is one of those tests where we can adapt to. I saw a tweet, I think yesterday, the former U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia, Ambassador Tibor Nagy, said, yeah, I mean, he was on spot. He said, let's be practical. Okay. Yeah. He said, he actually was urging the United States government to support the deal. Now, let me backtrack a second. By the way, the press statements yesterday from the United States government, the spokesperson was point blank asked, should the deal be scuttled or canceled? He said, no. He said his answer was, no, diplomatic negotiations are important. So you have to understand, even the United States is not saying we should cancel this deal. At least that's how I read it. But yes, when Africans are sometimes trying to do innovative things, others try to be naysayers. And my point is, let's ignore the naysayers. And there are, even in the West, who are actually supporting this deal. Tibor Nagy is part of the establishment of the United States government. He's an ex-ambassador, but he knows what's going on, right? And even people in Washington probably will celebrate this because they know it reduces tension in the neighborhood. It helps Ethiopia get access to the sea directly. And if the U.S. knows that the Ethiopian economy grows, some of the geopolitical issues we see today will be resolved. Okay, what we're talking about is economic prosperity for hundreds of millions of Africans in the East Africa region. We should look at it in a very practical way. So what you're asking me is, there will be naysayers always. Those, Africans cannot do this. But listen, go to the history of Europe, how countries bought other countries or lands or leased other countries. Look at the United States. It's a patchwork. The United States actually bought a significant part of the country. It wasn't even leased. It bought outright from Russia, Alaska, the Louisiana Purchase from France and other countries. So there are practical ways of addressing it, but let's ignore the naysayers and proceed with this deal and others to come.
By the way, you just mentioned very important thing in your previous insight a while ago. You mentioned this African continental free trade in connection to Ethiopia's sea outlet agreement with Somaliland. It leveraged this African continental free trade to be executed smoothly there. How about in the context of BRICS?
This is actually economically, on the economic front, this has been a very momentous week for Ethiopia, a historic week for Ethiopia. As you mentioned, on the 1st of January, a 3 days ago, Ethiopia officially became a member of BRICS. The announcement was made back in August that you'll be joining, but officially is now a member of BRICS. I've said that many, many times. BRICS is transformational. It rearranges the deck, the global order. At least it has the potential to rearrange the global order. The what's called the global South now has a voice by expanding, of course. Now it's 10 member countries, accounting for almost half the world's population, about 37% of global GDP on a PPP basis. And of course, because of the addition of the Saudi Arabia and UAE, it's now, as an aggregate, is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. So it's a formidable group. It has the potential to be a very, very even more formidable group in the future. So Ethiopia, from Africa, by the way, is just this, the new members are Ethiopia and Egypt, and South Africa was already a member. So for Ethiopia to join this group, a very powerful group, has very significant. At the same time, Ethiopia this week also gained access to the sea. Imagine connecting all these things. So this is what I said earlier. Geopolitics also played a very significant role, not just on this port deal, but on the BRICS deal, okay? But at the end of the day, the practical benefits for Ethiopia and other BRICS members is also evident to see for everybody. Ethiopia now is, because it's a BRICS member, it can secure financing from the BRICS Bank, okay? In addition to, of course, the traditional World Bank, IMF, and bilaterals, it now can access the BRICS Bank, okay? So let's connect the dots. So BRICS, big significant step. And by the way, many countries, apparently some 40 countries are applying or waiting to join the BRICS. So you can see there's a movement here, there's momentum here, but it's a big historical thing for Ethiopia to be a member. So when you connect all these dots, you'll see the benefits. And that's why, you know, China has leased land in Djibouti. The United States, right next to the Chinese, have access to the Djiboutian land. So if this was already done for non-Africans, if Djibouti was willing and practically speaking, okay to lease land to non-Africans, and I think Djibouti connecting the dots and saying, you know what, I'll lease part of the port to Ethiopia would also, again, elevate. And then Djibouti will also directly benefit from Ethiopia joining the BRICS, economic growth, and also reducing the concerns of Ethiopia, its neighbor. It's a very important neighbor of Ethiopia by allowing Ethiopia to have access via Djibouti, just similar to Somaliland, at least part of the Djibouti port, for example. And they will get benefit, whatever they can negotiate. So big momentous week, economically speaking, for Ethiopia. And that's just good news for the whole neighborhood.
Finally, before leaving, if you have any comments, any remarks, the floor is yours.
Right. So about 15, 20 years ago, there was a cover story in the Economist magazine. They called it the hopeless continent, right? And we were all up in arms. We were all very unhappy about it. And then about 10 years later, they came back and say, Africa Rising, all right? Now, in between the Africa Rising narrative for a while, it was taking hold, but all of us told maybe an excitable type of story when we should have told a more nuanced story about Africa Rising. Africa Rising means doing practical deals like the Somaliland port deal. Africa Rising means Africa continental free trade becomes a reality beyond the paper that the leaders sign across Africa. I give an example. Ethiopian Airlines is a classic example of what Africans can achieve by working together. Today, it's almost like the national flag carrier for a lot of countries in Africa, connecting Africans to the rest of the world. And that's my view when we talk about these kinds of transactions or deals that was announced this week between Ethiopia and Somaliland. Let's put all these other things together and say, do we want to rise together? Okay? With all due respect, it's still referred to as a poor continent when it shouldn't be. Has all the resources, natural resources, has all the talent, it's people, 1 billion too. So when we talk practically like this kinds of transactions, these kinds of deals, then the Africa Rising narrative becomes real. And for Africa to rise also, the really big countries on the continent need to rise. Just like China rose and uplifted first Southeast Asia and the rest of the world, if we have the anchor countries, the larger countries in Africa, from north to south to east to west, then the rest of the smaller and medium-sized countries will rise together. And that's my message. Let's work together. And I think we'll rise. Africa Rising will be real.
Mr. Zemedeneh Nigatu, chairperson for Fairfax Africa Fund and very senior economic analyst in Africa and beyond. Thank you for your expertise, sir.
Thank you for having me back.
Okay. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. This brings you the end of our edition for today. See you next time with another edition. Bye-bye. Have a good one.